So I'm reviewing this week Kingdom of Prep, the story of J.Crew by Maggie Bullock, and I couldn't put this book down. It is a perfect blend of narrative, charting the roller coaster of a business across several decades. It's also a character study going really deep into the psyches of four key characters in J.Crew's history, both the two founders and the celebrity leadership of Mickey Drexler and Jenna Lyons. And that character studies gets us into the corresponding impact that those characters had on leadership and corporate culture of the brand over several decades. And finally, this book is an abundance of lessons in retail history over the past 40 years. It's a great read, whether you're a retail nerd or not. I think anyone would really enjoy it for those reasons. You know, it's not a retail textbook, but for the purpose of this podcast and knowing that if you're watching this or listening to this, you are a retail nerd, I'm going to focus on the retail history aspect and use it to talk about parallels with what we're seeing in today's modern retail environment. And there's a perfect quote from the book introduction that really sums this up, which is, J.Crew is, in fact, an almost perfect microcosm of how shopping itself has evolved over the past 40 years and how we as consumers have evolved too. So in this episode, I'm going to share 3 key themes from my personal reading notes of Kingdom of Prep, the J.Crew story. Welcome to the Retail Media Breakfast Club, where there is always a latte to learn. I'm your host, Kiri Masters, and every weekday at 6 a.m. Eastern, I bring you candid and real discussions in the world of retail media and marketplaces in just 10 minutes. But today it's Friday, and Fridays are a special edition of the show where I share my notes from a book that I've read that's relevant to retail. It might be the origin story of a retailer or a textbook on a business concept. Look, we don't always have time for reading as much as we want, but when you're a part of the Retail Media Breakfast Club, we get to copy each other's homework. So let's jump in to this week's book. So the first theme here is the evolution of retail channels. And as you probably know, J.Crew started out as a catalog brand and evolved over the course of its history into a brick and mortar retailer and most recently in e-commerce. But we can also look at it as one of the pioneers, not the first company that did this, but a pioneer in what we call vertical retail and what we would also now sort of call D2C. So I loved reading about the early era of catalogs because I know what an impact the catalog business has had on retail over time, but I was never around for that era of retail. And it was very interesting to sort of look at the parallels that we have today. So the catalog was both a sales channel and a brand building tool, and J.Crew was really effective at using the catalog as a brand building tool. They headhunted a hotshot photographer away from Ralph Lauren, which was the really big aspirational brand at the time, and developed this really, really strong brand look and feel and this sense of history and this preppy lifestyle. So with all of its customer data from the catalog business, J.Crew was able to develop crazy amount of insights about their customers. They would know how many customers lived within 10 miles of a potential store location, and they used that data to identify where they should open new stores. They knew the purchase frequency and average spend. They could predict store performance based on catalog data. And also in the catalog industry, to acquire new customers, they would rent lists from list brokers. And this is how they got their initial names on the list, was renting names, which they would send a catalog out to. And then if someone bought from that catalog, it would go onto J.Crew's house list. That was now an owned customer for them. And it meant this building the house list was your first party data, essentially, that you knew the names and addresses of these people who'd bought from you before. From there, you could do lifetime analysis, repurchase, rates, customer lifetime value, etc. But when we think about the modern landscape today, a lot of brands are renting audiences, right, from retailers or from Meta or Google. So it is, again, a similar thing by the same name. So we move into the mid-90s now in terms of the era here. And this is when online shopping is beginning to emerge. And as it was at a lot of companies at the time, the prevailing attitude at J.Crew was, why would anyone buy clothes online? There was just a resistance to this idea of, well, who's going to want to buy something that they can't try on, they can't feel the fabric. And this was a big element of J.Crew's value prop, was the quality of the clothing, and that it was sort of luxury at an accessible price point. And how could you convey that online? So that's where the skepticism came from. Then there was also concerns about credit card and payment security. And this was just the way it was done. That was the internal resistance. This is how we do it. So it was very difficult to move that over time. There's a lot of concern around cannibalization. So there was concerns about the online business cannibalizing the store business. And before that, it was the store business cannibalizing the online business. So this is something that we see playing out today, where brands, need to reinvent themselves for different channels, different audiences, different aesthetics and ways of doing things. And to do that, this is what the Innovators Dilemma is. They need to sort of cut off one of their arms in order to stay in the race. And it's really painful. And that's what creates all this inertia. So we see that happening with J.Crew at this stage. The final theme I'm going to talk about here is the big competitive curveball that was thrown at J.Crew in the form of fast fashion. So fast fashion disruption hit the apparel industry in the 2000s. The first wave was H&M, who arrived on the scene in 2000 and offering really cheap runway knockoffs. This is the start of a big wave that changes consumer psychology around the longevity of apparel. So instead of buying something that you're going to hold on to for years, so it needs to be good quality, it needs to physically hold up. This new aesthetic was all about the selfie era, and so things were cheap. Zara quickly follows H&M's lead, and they come in with some more innovation. They have factories running 24 hours a day and a timeline that's just 3 weeks from design to store. And this is unthinkable for J.Crew because it takes them typically a year to go from design to store. And this is retraining customers as well. So a quote from the book is, Zara changed everything. By stocking as few as 3 or 4 copies of a new dress in its thousands of locations, Zara retrained its customers. So this really short production time and the fact that these clothes were not going to be around forever made customers want to go into the stores frequently, buy at full price because they didn't know if that same sweater or dress was going to be there 2 weeks from now. So J.Crew and basically all of the apparel retailers of its ilk couldn't match this fast fashion speed without changing their entire business model. This kind of went against everything that they stood for. So very obvious what the parallel is today. It's the Shein and Temu disruption that we're seeing across the board. And we've got Amazon Haul off the back of that. So this is reinforcing this consumer psychology about, I want it cheap, I want more stuff, I want the thrill of the hunt. And this is a big reason why people shop on Shein and Temu, is the entertainment aspect of it. And that was some data that came from Salesforce that I reported on a little while ago. Back then, Zara and H&M trained consumers to expect constant newness. And now Shein and Temu are training consumers to expect rock bottom prices with massive selection. All right, I'm going to wrap it up here. The takeaway here is there's nothing new under the sun. There's the same concerns under a different guise. J.Crew had to reinvent itself from catalog to a store-driven retailer to then e-commerce. And this is a challenge. And so people listening to this podcast in e-commerce roles, in retail media roles, are at this crest of the wave. And we're still at the point where we have to entice other people to come along on the journey, educate them on the journey, how this world is changing. And I think that books like this, when you read about reinvention, it helps you feel a little less alone, that brands have stood the test of time and reinvented themselves successfully. There's always a way to reinvent yourself, reinvent a brand, reinvent a business model. Well, that is it for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Retail Media Breakfast Club. We meet here every day at 6 a.m. Eastern. So be sure to subscribe and get your daily dose of insights, trends, and hot takes in the world of retail media and marketplaces.